Good morning, everybody, and welcome to this leadership episode of 30 Minutes to President's Club. My name is Armand Farouk, and I'm here with my co-host, Nick Sigalski, and we are back in studio with Alex Kremer. If you have not heard of Alex Kremer before, you should probably listen to one of his 7 episodes on 30 Minutes to President's Club. There were over 40 sales teams at Outreach, and his team was number 1 as a director of sales. He then was a head of sales under the one and only Mark Cosaglo over at Catalyst, and now he is the founder and CEO over at Alluviance and has some of the best coaching tactics in the game. And today it is all about coaching your reps on discovery. Nick, why should people listen?
So we broke this episode into how you first coach discovery, and then we zoomed in into how you can coach before, during, and after sales meetings that your reps are having. You should expect to learn why you should not be giving your reps direction on how to change the call within the 30-minute window before the meeting. You should expect to learn how you can help your reps work the room when you have executives that are starting to fade. And then Alex takes us through how you should properly debrief a meeting so that the rep actually learns how to get better.
Alrighty, Alex, welcome back to the show. We start every show with your top 3 actionable leadership takeaways. Let's get your 3.
All right. Number 1, if you're feeling it, just name it. Especially if you're talking to a rep and you're afraid to present something, say that you're afraid to present it. It even relates to if you're a sales rep and you're talking to a prospect and you're feeling something weird and you don't really know how to name it and you're feeling, name it. It makes you be authentic and vulnerable and also gives the other person permission to be like, oh, that's the type of relationship we're having. Let's do it. So for example, if I was really afraid to give Nick feedback on how good his hair is looking compared to mine, I might say, Nick, I want to name something. And to be honest, I'm a little bit fearful of naming it. And I'm actually feeling like my body kind of tense up because like I'm afraid of what you're going to say. Your hair looks better than mine. Change the flow.
Alex, I got to name this. I'm feeling a little bit uncomfortable because I don't know where the second takeaway is going to come through, but could you please just name it for us?
Second takeaway, it's all about the disco debrief. And this might sound so basic, but it's the thing that if you don't do this every single time, you're hurting both yourself and your reps. After, let's say you get off a big call with a prospect and you talk to your rep and the rep says to you, so tell me how I did. Pause and ask them, what do you feel like you did well? And where do you feel like there's the biggest opportunity for growth? One of the things that you're trying to get to is when they can come to the answer on their own, it's going to be a hell of a lot better than anything you can say. Mm-hmm. Because first off, they're going to feel the emotion of the answer when they came to it. And when they feel the emotion, that literally changes the neuroplasticity in their brain, and that allows them to actually take changes. Mm-hmm. The second thing, when you ask them this question, what you're trying to analyze is their level of self-awareness. Mm-hmm. If they are not self-aware of what they did well or where there could be improvement, that's a whole different issue. And that tells you the type of rep you have and what you need to be doing to actually make sure that you're helping them best.
What's number 3?
Number 3, this is one of my favorite ones. And this can be applied to honestly if you're a leader or as a rep. And it's simple. Take your freaking hands off the keyboard. One of the key things that I see so many people doing is when they're on a call, they're hunched over, their shoulders are clenched, and they're typing everything that the rep or the prospect is trying to say. And what does that actually prevent you from doing? Being present and actually listening to them. Especially as you got pretty much an AI chatbot recording every single word that you say these days, you're fine. Take your hands off the keyboard, literally like drop your shoulders, like lengthen the distance from your ears to your shoulders, open up your palms. And what I actually like to do is I actually like to kind of like cock my head to the side a little bit and squint my eyes, which it like puts me physiologically into a state of listening, of presence. And what I'd say is that the biggest gift that you can give to anybody, the biggest gift is your presence, right? Because there's an opportunity cost for that. You can't give your presence to anywhere else except for who's in front of you.
So Alex, I think we're going to focus a lot of this episode on how you coach your reps through discovery. Before we do that, could you walk me through, could you break down the different buckets or chapters of how you teach discovery to a salesperson?
There's many different types of ways to go about discovery, and it really is dependent on who that person is and their specific type of style. What I remember a great leader of mine one time said is, if you don't know the problem that you are trying to solve for, you don't have a deal. He nailed this down into our heads. And I remember, especially when I made the move from being an SMB seller up into a corporate seller, that's actually, from my opinion, like the hardest jump that you can make from us as a seller perspective. It's actually not from an SDR to an SMB seller. It's the SMB to corporate, because it's no longer about just like transactional. It's like, I actually need to truly understand the problem that we're solving for. And so different types of buckets that I would say is, first off, are you coming in with a hypothesis? I believe, based on the research I've done with your company, here's where you guys are at. And most likely what that means is you're dealing with X, Y, and Z problem, which is probably impacting you with this, which might be measured by that. Is that right? And if you come in with that, if you're right, awesome. They'll say yes, and if you're wrong, they'll say, no, that's not right. And they'll give you the freaking right answer. So it's like a fail-safe way. The second type of bucket that I always like is like the lay of the land, right? This is just like, hey, how many reps do you have? What's going well with your reps? What technology you're using? Different stuff like that. Let's just get an idea of what are we working with. Another bucket is the heaven and the hell. The heaven is, where do you want to be? What's the vision that you're actually going for? How would that feel? What would that open up for you? And the hell is, what's actually holding you back? What would happen if you don't solve for that? How would that manifest? What would that prevent you from doing? What you're trying to do is create that gap. Another bucket is what I like to call getting to the quantifiable pain. This is one of the hardest things to actually do as a rep. You say, cool, here's your problem, but can you actually quantify how big that problem is? And one of the best ways you need to do that is like saying, what's the metric we're actually trying to measure the problem by? For example, if someone says we have a pipeline problem, you say, cool, how are you measuring pipeline? Maybe it's meetings booked. Maybe it's by the amount of ARR that's in your pipeline. Maybe it by the number of cold calls that your team is making. What's the metric we're measuring it by? So how do you quantify the pain? The last thing I'll say, and I actually learned this from Manny Medina, who is a CEO of Outreach. He always said, when you find a prospect who's doing great and you don't really feel a pain, how do you actually push them to think even bigger? And I might say, hey, Nick and Armand, 30 Minutes to President's Club is doing phenomenal. I've been seeing your guys' growth. I've been seeing you on LinkedIn. I got to ask you, what's that one thing that if you did would get you to the next level, even bigger and better, that you're trying to solve for? And so it's a little bit less of like twisting the knife and more of like, hey, how do we actually get you enrolled into a higher vision for your company?
This would be a lot for a junior rep to possibly take in. When you're teaching this, either during onboarding or during a team training, what does this actually look like? Are you walking through each bucket and then literally scripting out the talk tracks for them? Is it giving them example questions they can ask in each bucket? How specific are you going when you're teaching discovery in each of these buckets?
Great question. I would say when I'm talking with let's just call it like a junior, more SMB oriented rep, I focus on the first three. The hypothesis is super easy. You can literally give them like a slide that says like copy and paste exactly what this is, fill in the blanks with the research you did on your company, and just know how to come in with a perspective. What I always like to do is like, I would literally go on LinkedIn, look at insights and looked at like their job growth on LinkedIn, and I'd copy and paste that. And then if I'm talking to a CRO, they're like, that's my company. Oh man, this person did a little research. It's like such a tiny little thing that sets you just a tiny bit apart of like, this person came in prepared. So that's super easy to do. The lay of the land, I gave them a Google spreadsheet that was like, here's lay of the land questions and here's heaven and hell questions. The lay of the land is just super basic. This isn't going to get you to pain per se. And a lot of reps stay here. And that's usually the problem. If I say, cool, how many reps do you have? What tech do you have? Cool. Let me tell you about our product. Is like, I have no idea like what the pain is. It's just like if I see a beautiful woman in a bar, let's say I was single, and I would say, oh, I want to go and talk to this person. My first question when I go up to them is not, hey, you want to get married? My first question is, what's your name?
Mm-hmm.
Where are you from? Right? It's the lay of the land. Before I can ask the heavy hitter questions like going on a date or something like that, I need to at least understand, hey, who is she? Or else I'm coming off desperate or it's out of rapport. The heaven and the hell, I would say, here's some heaven questions. And I like literally give them 4 to 5 bulleted questions of here, you can use these. And then here's the hell questions and give them 4 to 5 bulleted questions. I start there. If you can master that, dog, you're better than 95% of sales reps out there because you've at least started to understand the pain that's going on.
What are some other tools or resources that you found helpful in making sure that your reps actually execute this stuff and it doesn't just go in one ear and out the other?
At the end of the day, you have to be making your mouth articulate the words over and over and over again.
Mm-hmm.
And so I always like to do mock discovery calls. When I joined Outreach and I was a new rep, I had come from Microsoft and I was starting to learn how to sling sales engagement.
Mm-hmm.
And I had never given a true discovery calls. Like when you're selling Microsoft, it's like, here's what we got, like you buying it or not.
Yeah.
And when I was selling Outreach, I was like, man, I truly don't know how to do discovery. And so I would actually speak with a solution consultant and a senior AE, each of them at least once a week for my first 3 months. So by the end of that, I had done 20 to 30 mock discovery calls over and over and over again. And initially they were easy. They were giving me T-ball answers. And eventually, as I started doing it, like they were pushing back. Like I was like, challenge me here. And it made it so that by the time I actually showed up in the real thing, I was like, I've asked these questions before. I've heard different types of answers. When I see a rep and their first time trying out a discovery call live with a prospect, I'm like, I can tell this is your first time here. That's the value of having a team. Like, put yourself in the position like it's the real thing and don't rely on anybody else except for, I mean, if you're a manager, like require your team to do that with each other or you do that with your rep.
When I was selling insurance, one of the things that really stuck with me is they walked through a basic discovery framework and then they were like, these are the 10 top performers on the floor. You got to go through every single one of them in a mock. And then when I got in my first closing role at Carta, they were like, here's what the product does. Here are some discovery questions. Great, start taking SMB calls. And I had 5 days until I got put on the round robin. And I was like, absolutely not. All these other reps are just like scrolling around the product demos and stuff like that. I literally put together my own list of the top 10 reps on the floor. And I was like, every single one of you, I'm doing a minimum of 2 mocks per day over the next 5 days. And in 1 week, I got to run 10 discovery calls. So when I actually turned on the demo nozzle, I was ready to rock. So folks, it's like teach is step 1. Learning the concept is step 1. You should not spend 80% of your time in that mode. You should spend 20% of your time in the mode and then practice. And then once you're in the game, coach. And that's the mistake that people make is they spend hours and hours and hours in onboarding and they're teaching and onboarding these people, but then they don't actually make them practice it or they don't coach them on the concept in the game. So nothing actually sticks in their mind.
The only thing I'll add to that too is if you can have a rubric that tests out how well you did, like on a scale of 1 to 10, how was your frame? On a scale of 1 to 10, how was your discovery? On a scale of 1 to 10, how was it speaking to the trends? 1 to 10, how was your product? Next steps. Like actually have them assess it so you actually can start to quantify how they're doing it. And then you can actually start to measure the growth of it as well versus like, that one felt really good.
How often do you use like rubrics and call scorecards with your team? Because I feel like there's a world where there's a practical use of it where it's actually helpful. And then there's a world where it's a paper exercise where people don't take it seriously and it's more academic.
At the beginning, I think it's really helpful, especially when you just say, hey, here's just rep, I'm going to measure you on this.
Yeah.
And whether or not you're actually looking at the numbers every single time, at least they have a scorecard so they can say, okay, here's my syllabus. That
shows them where to focus because otherwise they've got a million different things that they're thinking about. And you're like, these are the 4 things you got to nail. It's like what you were saying about you just need to set an agenda, get to a business problem and get a next step. It might be ugly if you're new, but that's the thing you have to focus on. The rubric shows them where to focus.
The whole purpose, again, make your mouth articulate the words that you're saying. That's it. If you do that, you're going to build confidence.
The most basic call coaching scorecard you can build is combining Alex's buckets. So build out your buckets, whether it's the 5 that he mentioned. Sometimes for us, it's just agenda, discovery questions, next steps, and then 0, 1, 2 on the point scale or 1 to 10. 0 is you didn't do it at all. 1 is you did it. Again, it might not have looked sexy, but you did it. And then 2, you did it with really solid style. So your discovery questions were timed perfectly. You asked the questions with finesse. Your agenda wasn't too long, it wasn't too short. You said it just right. You wove your POV into the agenda perfectly. That's the stylistic piece. And then you can just run it for each bucket so that reps can very clearly score themselves 0, 1, 2. Easy to understand.
Let's say I'm riding a bike and over to my left, I see this beautiful meadow and I decide to ride my bike through the meadow. And I might hit a rock, hit a hole, and fall down on my bike along that meadow. But the next time that I'm riding my bike and I see this meadow, I'm going to see a very thin strip where my tires were through that meadow. And I might go on it again. And this time, I might still fall, whatever it might be, but the more times I go on it, that small strip where my tires were turned into this big, long road to the point where I can actually ride my bike down that meadow without any hands on the handlebars. Once I get comfortable with that, I'm actually going to feel more comfortable to purposefully veer off of that main strip that I made because I'm comfortable with it. And that's the key thing that we're trying to teach here. Give them a script. Give them the questions to be asking. Once you've proved you can master that, then start to try something new. Start to go into the longer grass. Start to try like a different type of talk track that you might fall back on your face a little bit. But like when you at least have that like solid foundation and you've shown that you can do that, then we can start to expand.
The reality is you cannot script out everything for them, and they have to get to a place where they use their brains and they have to think critically through those things. I'm working with a team where about half of the team does that right now. But then there's a couple other reps where if they don't get spoon-fed what to say, they just throw their hands up and they're like, you didn't tell me what to say. How would you recommend I go back and coach those reps? What do I need to tell them to get them to start thinking and working on their own?
You have to make sure that the jersey fits onto you versus you trying to fit into the jersey, meaning you are different. You have had a different background, have had different opportunities, have had different challenges than literally any other human being in the world. That's what makes you unique. And if you are not owning that and you're just trying to fit into sound like everybody else, guess what? You're literally going to be like everybody else. Yes, master the skill set. Yes, master the script. But at the end of the day, it's gotta sound like you. It's gotta come from the unique vibration of you. If you are weird, Armand, and I told you, Armand, you're weird. And I was like, Armand, you're weird. And you're like, I'm not weird. Like, I'm totally normal. Like, what are you talking about? I'd be like, that's pretty lame. And like, I kind of lost a little bit of respect. And I don't feel as connected with you. But if I was like, hey, Armand, you're pretty weird. And you're like, hell yeah, I'm weird. I'm like the weirdest person that I know. That's what I'm talking about. Like, I like you more. Like, I connect with you more. That actually gives me permission to own my weirdness. As a rep, yes, the skill sets, the tactics, the strategies are definitely important. But if there's not that underlying foundation of like, dog, I'm just going to be different on this call, like, you better be ready for it. Okay, game on. I'm buckled up. I engage more in that.
I can think of a couple places where you might coach reps. One is before the call happens. 2 is on the call. And then the third is after the call. Before you go into a call with your reps, what kind of game planning are you doing?
So I have a rule. If you are giving advice 30 minutes within the meeting itself, you're going to hurt yourself because then you're changing up the game plan. Then you're actually saying, hey, I don't trust you, rep. So I'm going to tell you how to do things. And you want the most important thing for the rep is for them to have confidence with themselves. There's always like 4 things I always think of as the prep. The first off is, what are we going through? That's the obvious thing. The second thing is, what are the questions that we need to get answered on this call to move this deal forward? Who else is involved in the decision process? What is the timeline for it? Do you have budget, right? Things along those lines. The third thing is obviously, what's the outcome that we're going for? The fourth one, and this is my favorite, is how do you, Mr. or Mrs. Rep, want to feel leaving? And also, how do you want your prospects to feel leaving? And this is one that's like, I don't know if I'd call it like a tactical one, but it's like, I want to feel passion. I want to feel, man, we just crushed that. And by them actually articulating the emotion that they want to feel, they just kind of like tapped into that emotion. When you actually start to feel that emotion, that's actually coming the transmission that you're coming from. And that's actually going to make the other people start to feel that same sort of thing. So you're actually like setting a really clear intention. You know, obviously I give speeches all the time to different types of organizations. My always thing is like, how do I want these people to feel after the speech? Because it's not about my content. They won't remember mostly the 3 steps that I went through. What they will remember is that motherfucker made me feel like alive. And that's what they'll remember.
There's the saying of, oh, people buy on emotion and back it up with logic. But I think when we game plan for a call, we're mostly thinking about the logical. Okay, what are the steps? What are the chunks? What are we going to show? What are their pains? But you're right. If you can interweave the emotion with it, because that's an outcome you're asking about. That's just another form of the outcome. What's the outcome we're looking for from a logic perspective? What's the outcome we're looking for from an emotion perspective?
This is why it's actually a really important question to ask the prospect when you're in the meeting. Cool. If you did hit that goal, I just got to ask, and you can put a little grin on your face. How would it feel? Right? Like this is like a weird question to ask. And I'm going to name that.
Yeah.
How would it feel?
I've seen it go 2 ways. So if I actually zoom into like my experience as a rep, I will never forget my first discovery call. I was brand new to sales, 2.5 months in, right? I'd gone through the onboarding. I was pounding the phone. I get on this meeting. It was a virtual meeting. I go into one of the phone booths. I open up the meeting. The prospect's there, camera off, of course, and I'm freaking pouring sweat nervous. And it was my first call. So my VP of sales joined this call. And he joined with also his camera off, but he was messaging me on Slack throughout the meeting. And he was giving me questions to ask word for word. And we hadn't game planned before. And so literally we would get to like this point in the call and I'd see the Slack and I'd be like, and how would that impact your business? And they were like, wait, what? I was just asking you about a feature that you have and whether or not you have it. And the call was a disaster. And it really threw my confidence off. But there have also been times that, honestly, Armand and I have been on calls together and he'll message me and be like, hey, they said this, ask about that. And it really helps us go in the right way. And so I guess my question for you is, what's the right way to coach in a call?
It takes like a certain level of tango with the rep itself. If it's a first time rep, I'll probably engage more actually live on the call, sometimes to show how it's done. Let's say I talked 80% of the time and the rep talked 20% of the time. The more calls we have together, I'm going to try to flip that, obviously. Now, I've had reps where we're slacking the entire time and we're talking about like, this person hasn't talked. How do we ask this question? This is how we overcome it. And there's certain reps where we got off the call and he was like, it was actually, I remember a guy named Ross. He's like, bro, if you keep slacking me during these calls, I'm going to freak out. He's like, because I'm losing presence with what we're actually doing there. It's just about like, do you have a really good relationship with the rep? And this is like the beauty of it, the Kobe and Shaq type of thing. Like, oh man, when you toss like that, it's the perfect alley-oop versus like, and that takes practice for it, but it also takes clear communication. And again, it goes back to, at the end of the call, what did we do well? And where is there opportunity for improvement here? What we did well is, I feel like we ask questions. What we didn't do well is you were slacking me a whole bunch and I couldn't concentrate there. Okay, beautiful. What's a better way to actually go about this so we can be on the same page?
If I want my rep to pull up because the conversation is getting a little bit too deep in the weeds, while they're talking, I will draft a Slack, a short one, and it's usually 2 sentences. It's like, hey, this is a little bit in the weeds. I'm going to jump in and ask a question. That's just to pull it up once. From there, take it after I ask that question. As I jump in, I send the Slack. So as I'm talking, they're reading the Slack and they're like, okay, I don't have to be thinking, talking, holding up the call. I'm taking the call control while they have the time to ingest and process the Slack. And then from there, the prospect usually answers. They probably have another minute or so to like think about how they're going to take it over. But they know it's not like Armand's taking over the call for the next 5 questions. What are other roles you will play as the manager on a sales call?
One of the key ones is to be looking at everybody who's on the call and just be looking at their facial expression, or to be saying, are they paying attention? Are they not paying attention? This person looks angry. This person looks, scared, whatever it might be. And just to understand what that looks like. If we have a key decision maker on the call who hasn't said anything, let's say her name is Tiffany, I'll like, hey, can I just pause here real quick, Joe? Tiffany, I have a question for you, right? And notice what I did. I just called her name and said, I have a question for you. And then what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to give just a little bit of a background of what we covered in the past fitness. So we just showed you how to look at the data analytics to be able to analyze your reps. I'm curious, how do you think that would impact you as the VP of RevOps?
Mm-hmm.
I'm giving a complete softball
Yes.
to her. And obviously she wasn't paying attention. So I was like, hey, I want you to just, because what I'm not wanting to do is say, hey, Tiffany, what do you think? And then if she's like, oh, I wasn't paying attention, you just made her look like shit, she's not going to like you. You actually want to set her up to crush that question there. So paying attention, who is actually needing to be engaged, that the rep is so focused on just moving forward in a linear type of way.
So I want to go to after the call. So post-call coaching, you already shared with me you ask them for their perspective first.
Mm-hmm.
Are there other things that you're doing post-call from a coaching perspective that you think the listeners should know?
If you have a new flavor of the week every single time, you're going to drive people mad. Because sure, you might have the sexiest wisdom that you can impart upon somebody, but if you had 4 calls that week with the rep and you had 4 different pieces of wisdom, guess how many of it is going to be used? Probably none of it. It like takes a little bit of like an ego check of like, ooh, I could give you something really good. And maybe this person is prepared for that, but I'm trying to drill down the one thing over and over and over again. If in a previous call, I didn't think that they did a good opportunity on engaging everybody in the room, this second call that we just had, I'll be like, hey, I just want to name like engaging everybody on the call. I think you did a lot better there. Here's one more thing that you could do to help engage more people. Mm-hmm. And all of a sudden, like the next call, they're like, okay, I'm thinking about engaging people in the room. I'm thinking about, it's like one thing at a time. Show me that you've accomplished this. And now after that, let's move on to the next thing. And I would say, honestly, at tops, have 2 things that you're focused on a rep with. And like, even in your one-on-ones, put that in whatever OneNote, Google Doc you got that reminds you to bring that up again. Hey, remember, we've talked about this now a few times. Like, how are you feeling about engaging everybody in the room? Be a freaking broken record. Yeah. Do yourself and the rep service, and don't have something new every single time. I've actually said this before to you guys, but I want to tie it back because like I'm actually feeling myself become really excited by this conversation because I love coaching people. You're not just coaching people how to become a better sales rep. You're literally coaching them to become a better freaking version of themselves. Mm-hmm. You have a responsibility as a leader to make them more effective at their role. And if that comes tactics, they're going to become more confident within that. When they're more confident, how's that going to show up in their dating life? Mm-hmm. How's that going to show up in terms of manifesting what they truly want within their career? Remember, when you coach, it's so much more than just the quota. Mm-hmm. The quota is a wonderful byproduct of it. Don't get me wrong, but it's like so much more. And it's like, now you're doing something meaningful.
Unfortunately, the clock is ticking, and so we need to leave 5 minutes for advertisements to recap and next steps, like with every discovery call. And so we have to move to the final question. We talked about a lot of good habits, but what is one bad habit that every sales leader should break so that all sales teams get a little bit better?
This is one that it's hard to do as a leader. Shut up, especially on team calls. When you are the voice who is talking the most, you're doing it wrong. Your job is to not impart all this incredible wisdom. Your job is to facilitate powerful conversation amongst the team. That includes having people journal, putting people into this wonderful thing called breakout rooms, and having people share amongst one-on-ones and then as a larger team. When you get other people speaking about these things, it actually makes your job a hell of a lot easier. Mm-hmm. But a lot of times leaders say, I know things, and my job is to just share everything I know. That's not your job. There's a time and a place for it, but you're wanting to help people find the answers within themselves versus externally coming from you.
Would you give the audience 2 seconds and explain what you do with your immersions and how they can figure out more about it?
We're a community. We have sales professionals, leaders, and founders come to them, and we focus on 3 key things, one of which is master the craft of being a great influential type of person, whether it be as a sales professional or as a leader. But we also really work on the inner game, which is about how do you both gain clarity in terms of what your vision and your purpose is, and also how do you face the stuff that's holding you back, imposter syndrome, stress, burnout, even depression. And the key thing that we do is we're surrounding you with other people who are doing those things as well, right? So our goal is to unlock you to not just achieve at extremely high level, but to feel a deep level of fulfillment in your life.
Folks, Alex does some awesome stuff over at Alluviance. I believe your next in-person immersion is at Costa Rica.
Costa Rica.
I don't know if it's probably too soon for you to get in on that one, but we'll put a link to figure out more about Alluviance down in the show notes. I would definitely recommend checking it out. And folks, everyone hang on for a 60-second recap coming up soon. Alrighty, Nick, it is time for a 2x2 recap from this episode with Alex Kremer. What do you have for your 2?
So my first one is in that critical 30-minute window before the meeting actually starts. You should not be telling your rep to change their game plan. Even if the game plan is a little bit less than like what you would have wanted them to do, that shows them that 1, you don't trust them, but 2, they're going to be scrambling, reorienting around a different call structure, and it will go worse than if you had just let them run with the pretty good meeting structure. So no feedback in that 30-minute window. Number 2 is kill the flavor of the week coaching. You likely are going to come out of a call with one of your reps with a list of some things that they could have done better. It will totally throw them off, and they won't absorb anything if you give them a flavor of the week and a different thing after every single call. That does not mean that you can't give more than one piece of feedback, but any feedback that you give should ladder up into the big theme that you are working on with your rep. So focus on one big theme as opposed to a different thing after every single call.
Number 3, when you are game planning a discovery call with your rep, the last question you should ask them is, how do you want to feel, or how do you want your prospect to feel? If you're going into a presentation and you want them having their minds blown about the best content that they've ever seen in their lives, that is going to be a shared feeling of enthusiasm that you can inject into your rep so that their prospects feel the same. And then lastly, number 4, know your role as a manager going into a discovery call with your rep. The 3 roles we talked about are: number 1, for a junior rep, you might own the call entirely. Number 2, for a more senior rep, you might coach the call. So if it's down in the weeds, you might ask a question that pulls it back up. Or number 3, if it's a big presentation, your job might just to be to read the room, open up Zoom gallery view really, really wide, and make sure that anyone who's not paying attention while your rep is running the demo, you're asking them a question and pulling them back into the dialogue. Alrighty, Nick, how can people help us out?
They don't need to help us out today, Armand. They can go help Alex out. At the end, we talked about some of the Alluviance immersions that Alex and his team runs. He's been a really great friend to 30 Minutes to President's Club. He's come on again and again and again and freely shared his wisdom. And if you like some of the stuff that he talks about, there are opportunities to go way deeper with him. We'll put a link in the show notes to check those out. So go check out the stuff that Alex and his team does, and we will see you next week on the show.